Let's start by talking about survival films. They're alone, they have to adapt, they are maybe trapped and are trying to get back to a loved one, or are simply trying to survive and must learn in their journey why they need to survive when it would be easier just to give up. This is often presented as metaphor for what the character is experiencing internally. For example, Dr. Stone being trapped in a spacesuit and becoming further isolated from safety. At the end, she sheds that suit, symbolic of her no longer wanting to isolate herself from others. Other movies, such as 127 Hours, Castaway, The Martian, they're focused on realism and scientific accuracy. There are moments of internal struggle that contribute to the will to live, of course, but they take a back seat to the sheer mental fortitude that is needed to be able to carry on. Essentially, these films examine hopelessness and reach apotheosis or climax when the hero discovers hope at last and is able to push forward. There is something raw and instinctually exciting about this exploration of lone willpower. Most of our ancient stories featuring heroes and heroines incorporate other people, adversaries, lovers, parental figures, who are physically involved in the setting. Remove those characters, and the journey becomes much more harrowing. The stakes are raised to an infinite height. If you screw up, you will die because no one is there to help you. In this way, survivalist stories are also inherently individualist. While a family, loved one, or community may inspire the hero to continue on, they do so from the hero's own subconscious. Thus, these characters are simply a part of the hero, and the journey is allowing the hero to explore those parts of themselves. On the other hand, ancient stories and fairy tales featuring heroines are also stories of survival, willpower, cleverness, and brazenness. Fairy tales were often created by women and shared with women to warn them of the evils of the world and to give hope to those who have experienced those evils. Heroines in fairy tales are hunted, lured, and deceived. In the earliest versions of these tales, the heroines would save themselves from the dangers. For example, in one early version of the tale, Little Red Riding Hood cleverly escaped from the wolf and ran from the woods stark naked to safety. In later versions, Red is eaten. But in even later versions, often written by men, a man comes along to free Red from the wolf's stomach. So fairy tales are not static, and they evolve depending on who is telling the tale and what lessons are seen as important to that society. That said, we can still find earlier meaning in the fairy tale and in the symbols it presents. For example, those who identify with the innocence of Red might use her as an archetype to communicate that to the audience. But then that archetype can mature along the journey, slightly changing the way we see that fairy tale archetype. It's basically an ongoing conversation through symbols.
Ruby, just give me a sec.
In The Interpretation of Fairy Tales by Marie-Louise von France, she opens by stating, "Fairy tales are the purest and simplest expression of collective unconscious psychic processes. They represent the archetypes in their simplest, barest, and most concise form. I've said before that a story told from any medium can be myth or fairy tale. But not all stories are inherently these things. Fairy tale especially relies heavily on symbolism that comes directly from the subconscious, whereas myth relies more on cultural contexts that are both timely and timeless. We can analyze Star Wars as myth and fairy tale because it provides both subconscious symbolism and political and cultural messaging. Fairy tale is especially fun to analyze because it requires some deep diving into one's own psyche. Von France breaks down 4 methods of analyzing a fairy tale into the 4 functions of consciousness. The thinking type will point out the structure and the way in which all the motifs connect. The feeling type will put them in a value order, a hierarchy of values. The sensation type will look just at the symbols and amplify them. The intuitive type will see the whole package in its oneness. They're best at seeing the one message of the story that is simply split into many facets. Von France considers all of the above as rational and helpful to better understand and interpret any fairy tale. So let's dig into our main subject of this video and analyze Keep Breathing as a fairy tale. It is not just a story about how the heroine survives, although it does show that, Most importantly, it is about why. Keep Breathing is a roughly 3.5-hour story that is broken into 6 parts. So if you haven't watched it yet, go do that. It doesn't take long. Each chapter pushes our heroine deeper into her subconscious, forcing her to find resolution with the most important characters in her life. But ultimately, those characters are parts of herself. The core of the story is built around flashbacks from our heroine's point of view. In Arrivals, we're introduced to Liv Rivera.
Like a name in a fairy tale.
Myths and fairy tales always begin with the establishment of the normal world that our hero lives in before they are thrown into a different world. Liv's normal world is filled with work stresses, the bottling up of emotions to unhealthy levels, and meditative audio. In one moment of desperation, she gets on a plane that's fated to crash in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. This is the crossing of the threshold into the unknown. Liv's survival instincts kick in, and she is more capable of getting out of this bad situation than the men that flew the plane. In The Heroine's Journey by Maureen Murdoch, a heroine's normal world is the one in which she behaves according to the rules of man. If a woman feels alienated or rejected by her mother, she may first reject the feminine and search for recognition by the father and the patriarchal culture. No matter how successful she is, however, she finds that she is still undervalued and overworked. Liv rejects the needs of her own body.
That's not food, that's a cry for help.
And works harder than the men around her.
Where's everyone else?
They're starting to fall apart, so I sent them on a break.
Because she didn't have a positive feminine role model, and because her mother abandoned her, she sees femininity as weakness. Heroine's journeys often have a moment where the heroine realizes the men she's been relying on have either betrayed her, are not strong enough to protect her, have manipulated her, or have betrayed her kindness. The mask of male superiority is ripped away, and the heroine discovers power that is not determined by sex or gender. The end of the episode offers a plot twist of sorts. Liv is pregnant. Now, I should note that it's unfortunate that the show had to drop right in the midst of the damage caused by the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But if we view this from a symbolic point of view, there are some really beautiful themes going on here. Murdoch notes that in earlier times when metaphor and archetype, rather than scientific knowledge, described how things worked, there was a feeling of awesomeness towards women. A girl became a woman when she menstruated. She bled every month until she became pregnant, and then she stopped bleeding for 9 months and became a container for new life. It was thought that she retained the blood in her body in order to make a baby. After she had the baby, she would bleed once again, month in and month out, until menopause, when once again she stopped bleeding. This was also considered awesome, for now it was thought that she retained the blood in her body not to make a baby, but to make wisdom. We'll see more of this blood imagery later in the story. For now, from a storytelling perspective, Liv holds life. Also related, Von France discusses the archetype of mother goddesses and how they have been ignored or forgotten in the Western world, replaced with more physically powerful father-son archetypes. Liv is essentially becoming a mother goddess in this story, but she must first come to terms with the mother goddess that abandoned her. This episode is probably the most straightforward in terms of symbols and themes, but it is still absolutely beautiful. From the title alone, and because of Liv's current state, we know that she will need to build a fire and she will need clean drinking water. But the writers do something else with this. As Liv dives into the frigid lake to retrieve supplies, an important moment from her past surfaces. A moment when she did not want to live. This is also where food begins to play a very important role in Liv's state of mind. The hunger is not just real, it's a metaphor of Liv not being emotionally fed in her life. She's missing core nutrients, something that Danny is constantly trying to feed her. The fire in her memory is an alarm for Liv's state. She was ready to die. In contrast, as she is remembering this, also fighting for air, she desperately wants to live. The fire in her memory saves her and also makes her aware of the life inside of her. In contrast, building the fire using the cash she found in the plane saves her. Again, showing us that Liv needs to sacrifice being a perfect lawyer, time, money, to focus on feeding herself in more ways than one. She needs to take part in the cycle of life. In Women Who Run with Wolves, Estes discusses the symbol of the bear. To the ancients, the bear symbolized resurrection. The creature goes to sleep for a long time, its heartbeat decreases to almost nothing. The male often impregnates the female right before hibernation. Near the end of hibernation, the egg and sperm unite and cell division begins, so that the cubs will be born in the spring when the mother is awakening. Not only by reason of awakening from hibernation as though from death, but much more so because the she-bear awakens with new young. This creature is a profound metaphor for our lives, for return and increase coming from something that seemed deadened. The bear is also associated with huntress goddesses who bestow the power of tracking on women. But most importantly, they represent the ability to regulate one's life and move through the cycles of life with full awareness of one's own needs and emotions, to sleep when it's time to sleep, eat when it's time to eat, and to start anew when it's time to start anew. When the bear comes to live in her dream, it bestows its wisdom upon her, telling her what she needs to do to survive. But also, this can be a metaphor for Liv that she needs to nourish herself in her emotional life and be an active, intentional player in her life's cycle. This is contrasted with Liv's memories of her father after her mom left. Liv's father tells her not to think about her mother anymore, which Liv takes seriously, forcing away images of her black hair and red coat. But with her father's death comes the realization that he was hiding postcards from Liv's mother. The cycle of life, which Liv will be continuing with her child, cannot go forward until Liv reconciles with her mother. But we'll see how this reconciliation occurs in a later episode. For now, Liv finds the postcards in her memory, which is contrasted with her realization that she will be able to see lights in the dark. These are beacons of hope. I'll also add that this is the first time she looks directly at Sam, who we know is not physically there, but is acting as Liv's animus. Sam teases her, tells her that staying alive is impossible because that's Liv's masculine side telling her she's not strong enough. Remember, Liv's mother left her, leaving her without an important motherly figure in her life. Murdoch says that for her and many other women, being or feeling estranged from a mother can lead to an abandoning of the feminine parts of oneself. To heal that split, it's not enough to heal the literal bond between mother and daughter. Rather, one must develop a nurturing mother within oneself. At this point, we've seen more about Liv's relationships with her mother and her father, especially with her father. Liv has sort of defined herself by her father's values, so much so that when he dies, she no longer wishes to exist. Murdoch talks about this occurring in many tales regarding women and girls. For example, in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll wrote an exchange between Tweedledee and Tweedledum and Alice. "He's dreaming now," said Tweedledee, "and what do you think he's dreaming about?" Alice said, "Nobody can guess that." "Why about you?" Tweedledee exclaimed, "and if he left off dreaming about you, where do you suppose you'd be?" "Where I am now, of course," said Alice. "You'd be nowhere. Why, you're only a sort of thing in his dream." "If that there king was to wake," added Tweedledum, "you'd go out, bang, just like a candle." Von France also discusses this. She calls them anima women, those women who are conscious of themselves only as mirrors of the man's reaction to them. They exist only as the man's anima, as that man projects his anima onto them. So Liv is faced with this obstacle of finding her true self beyond the boundaries set by her father.
Your father needs to stop trying to control everything we do.
In Departures, this appears the main point of Liv's journey in circles. She can't break the cycle. She tells Sam she is done with him once she realizes that he is a part of her, that she has been telling herself she's not good enough her whole life. She circles her own tracks, she makes grave mistakes, which is contrasted with Liv's memories of her mother and her growing romance with Danny. It becomes clear that Liv cannot be with Danny fully until she heals the mother-daughter split within herself. She circles and circles until she falls. She breaks the cycle and dives into her subconscious, where her mother is waiting for her. As an aside, Este says that analysis, dream interpretation, self-knowing, exploration are all undertaken because they are ways of backtracking and looping. They are ways of diving down and coming up behind the issue and seeing it from a different perspective. Without the ability to see, truly see, what is learned about the ego self and the numinous self slips away. So we, as the viewer of this tale, can do what Liv is doing. We backtrack and loop, dive down, and ascend in order to explore our own psyche. This episode throws everything into chaos. It's time for Liv to face her mother. This chaos in Liv's mind is also a part of integration, in which Liv cleans out her own subconscious, integrates the parts that she needs, and discards the parts that she doesn't. In The Feminine and Fairytales, Von Franz says that dreams either compensate for the lopsidedness of our conscious view or complement its gaps. Fairy tales, because they are also mostly unsophisticated products of the storyteller's unconscious, do the same. Like dreams, they help keep our conscious attitude in healthy balance and have therefore a healing function. On the symbolism of the cave, Este says that the cellar, dungeon, and cave symbols are all related to one another. They are ancient initiatory environs, places to or through which a woman descends to the murdered ones, breaks taboos to find the truth, and through wit or travail triumphs by banishing, transforming, or exterminating the assassin of the psyche. Liv is starving, literally and figuratively. Her memories mesh together, the past and the present. Her conversations with her parents don't seem quite real. In her childhood kitchen, she finds books and dirt where food should be. And then, the same red paint that her mother used to cover the faces of the children she drew, symbolizing the moment when her mom gave up. This also symbolizes blood, the blood that connects her to her mother, the blood she has shed alone in the wilderness, and as a callback to Murdoch's discussions on pregnancy, the blood she contains in her body that is feeding her offspring. This is how Liv begins to reconcile with her mother. She eats it and begins chipping away at the rock, keeping her from continuing on. And then Liv begins to chip away at all of the reasons she is starving, what got her to this very moment. And she sorts out the good and bad in herself. Her mother in the cave represents death. Even though her mother is alive somewhere, she is dead to live. She left, she gave up, and death beckons her to do the same. The loss of daughter to the mother to the daughter, is the essential female tragedy. In Murdoch's book, she often repeats a sort of mantra about taking back the darkness, or in the dark, we discover ourselves. It is in enveloping ourselves in what was lost that we discover rage has taken its place. Many women are angry at their mothers because the mother did not nourish them in the ways that they desperately needed, in the ways that they were supposed to nourish them. The only way to be whole is to reclaim the darkness, the dark mother that is inside of us. This requires a descent into that darkness and rage, understanding it, then returning to the light, mindful of what just occurred. Liv descends, experiences this, then mindfully chooses life over death, leaving the rage behind. It is only after she deals with her mother that Liv is able to work through her emotional detachments. She journeys through her good memories that help her see the beauty around her. She begins to commune with the natural world. Carl Jung once said, "It would be far better simply to admit our spiritual poverty. When spirit becomes heavy, it turns to water. Therefore, the way of the soul leads to the water." Liv gives a sort of goodbye to the three characters in her life: her lover, her mother, and her father. These individuals also representing animus, shadow, and ego. The meditative audio repeats in Liv's mind, and you can see Liv finally coming to peace with her father's death. Liv also goes through the 4 stages of forgiveness as described by Estes. To forgo, to leave it alone. To forbear, to abstain from punishing. To forget, to refuse to dwell. And to forgive, to abandon the debt. The interesting part about Liv getting into the river is that she is now accepting life and death. She knows that this is the only way she can continue on, but she is also aware that she might die. She submits to the cycle of life and death. Estes says, at first, we all think we can outrun the death aspect of the life, death, life nature. The fact is we cannot. It follows right along behind us, bumpity bump, thumpity thump, right into our houses, right into consciousness. If in no other way, we learn of this darker nature when we concede that the world is not a fair place, that chances are lost, that opportunities come to us unbidden, that the life-death life cycles prevail whether we wish them to or not. Yet, if we live as we breathe, take in, and let go, we cannot go wrong. Liv Rivera dies and is born again by the flow of the river. This is real goddess shit here. She has carried life with her through the land of the unknown, the magical realm in which she slayed her demons. And now she brings her story to the realm of man. And the story itself is medicine for our souls. Estes says, in dealing with stories, we are handling archetypal energy, which we could metaphorically describe as being like electricity. But in the wrong place at the wrong time, the medicine will not have the desired effect. So I started this essay by saying that the story is not just about Liv surviving, but why she survived, which is something similar to other survival stories, except that these writers wanted to emphasize a transcendent message, one that would not have been as clear without flashbacks. That message is about overcoming trauma, reconnecting with the feminine, and giving into the natural cycles of life and death. It is about relinquishing control, giving into one's basic needs for emotional and spiritual nourishment, and learning to love. It is about feeding the soul the food it was starving for. Most importantly, it's a beautiful fairy tale that reminds us to eat.